All right, we are live. Good evening, everyone. My name is Seisha. I'm the social media manager here at Charis Books and Charis Circle. And tonight we are so excited to welcome Taylor Byas in conversation with Courtney Faye Taylor for a discussion of Resting Bitch Face, a poetry collection that transforms the Black female speaker from object, artistic muse, and victim to subject, critic, and master of her story. Tonight, Taylor is going to be in conversation with beloved writer and poet Courtney Faye Taylor, who's the author of Concentrate, winner of the Cave Canem Poetry Prize, the T.S. Eliot Four Quartets Prize, the Hurston Wright Legacy Award, and a finalist for the NAACP Image Awards, the Lambda Literary Awards, and other honors. Courtney lives in Atlanta, Georgia, where she's an assistant professor of English and creative writing at Agnes Scott College. And now it's my honor to introduce the woman of the hour, Taylor Byas, who is an award-winning poet and a Black Chicago native currently living in Cincinnati, Ohio. Her poetry collection, I Don't Click My Heels Three Times, won the Maya Angelou Book Award, the Ohioana Book Award, the Cherby Award, the BCALA Best Poetry Honor. And before I pass the mic on, I just wanted to go over a couple quick housekeeping things to remind the audience, both online and in person, to think of questions throughout their discussion. If you're in person, just keep them in your head, and we'll do a Q&A towards the end. And if you're online, I will voice your questions during the Q&A, and you can just leave them in the chat or in the Q&A section. And of course, a constant reminder that buying your book from Charis directly supports our work and allows us to keep putting on events like this. And so if you want to purchase Resting Bitch Face in person, Kira's selling the copies up front. And if you want to purchase it online, you can click on that teal button right below where our lovely authors are sitting. I'm going to pass it on to Courtney to start our discussion.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you, Taylor, for coming to visit us in Decatur, Georgia. I always want to start by just kind of asking, especially because this is your second full-length collection, so you have experience putting together a collection. And I feel like for every book, the moment that we know we have a collection is different. It's like there's a different idea or a poem that strikes that for us. So how did you know you had a collection? And just talk to me kind of about how you knew you had poems that were coming together to constitute a book.
So the process for this book was very, very different from the first book. For the first book, I didn't know that I had written a book until just about all the poems were written. And then I was like, oh, I see a conversation happening. The first version of Resting Bitch Face was actually my dissertation for my PhD program. So I had to have an idea of this book as I was writing it, which was both helpful, but it was also, I think, limiting in a lot of ways. So when I finished the dissertation, we sold it to Soft Skull in that version. And then after I graduated, I ended up, reading what I actually wanted to read. When I got out of the program, my mind was clear again. And then I ended up actually rewriting probably about a third of the book once I got out of the program. So I guess having the concept was really helpful, but ultimately I think I needed the space to like hear my own voice in my head again, which is kind of hard when you're in a graduate program. So it was also sharpened by the fact that I had just, done my PhD exams. So I also had a lot of Black women poets in my head that I had been studying the year before, which I think drastically informs how much like theory criticism kind of works its way into this book, which was not the case for the first book. So this is a very, very different project from the first one. But I think because of all of those factors that I ended up figuring out a lot about myself as a writer. And this book felt like coming into who I really am as a poet, which was really, really cool.
Yeah. I think a lot about, I Done Click My Heels Three Times feels like it's close to Chicago. It's close to like, so your home is there too. But these poems also feel close to a speaker, to you, especially this kind of excavation of gender, sexual, racial violence, both Black women's autonomy, but also this precarious position we have as being witnessed and the risk of being seen or possessed and watched. So I'm wondering about the emotional process of writing poems like this, um, and how you translate your experience or Black women's experiences as a whole, translate them onto the page.
Mm-hmm.
How that felt.
It was hard. What you'll notice in a lot of these poems, and a lot of the books, a lot of the poems in this book are prose poems for a
Mm-hmm.
specific reason. And it's because my mind works very differently when I'm working in prose poems. Like when you work in lineated poetry, you have the line break as a method to sort of create surprise, as a method to direct your reader. Um, for me, prose poems operate very cinematically in my mind. Like they're kind of like movies, and I think about a camera kind of moving throughout or directing the reader's gaze. And I think I needed that to create the necessary distance that it required to write some of these really difficult poems.
Mm-hmm.
There's the sculpture study series that runs through this collection, and the very first sculpture studies poem I wrote, I couldn't write it until I took it out of the eye because so much of it felt so personal. And I think that was actually a barrier for me in a lot of ways. I had to figure out, how do I access some of these really personal poems, and also protect the self. And I think a lot of this book required me to think about strategies of self protection. So you also see a lot of ekphrastic work as a result. You also see a lot of persona poems as a result, which is a way to kind of step outside of the self and embody another voice, right? Another way to kind of access rage that also felt really personal and hard if it was kind of an I, a version of me on the page. So I think in a lot of instances, this book was also a practice of like figuring out what are those poetic strategies of self protection, um, which was really liberating too in a way.
Yeah. That really relates to what I'm going to get into later about form. But would you mind reading either one of those prose poems or a sculpture
Mm-hmm.
series poem?
Yeah, I'll read the sculpture study number one. Sculpture study number one, Brooklyn, New York. A woman's real first lesson about her body is nothing to write home about. The second lesson, one of colonization. It happens in a big city, the sidewalks gone half dust, and the woman believing, for once, there is something for her to claim. This complex ecosystem of space, improvised measurements to guess by, the swing of a tote bag, a soft circumference of hair. The woman is eyeing her way to the J train when a man, made faceless by the crowd, grabs her ass. There are two options: be crazy or be quiet while the incident reworks the DNA. There is one option because the silence sires some sort of madness later. Right there on the corner, she stops, marbles against the summer heat, eases her hair from its rubber band to let something free. The faceless man hurts her to still life, an inanimate thing bedazzled in all the city's wet offerings, the day's earlier drizzle still drying, the humid air relentless with stickiness. What are we allowed to be when we hurt in public, human or statue? As if she thinks this into existence, the evening sun glosses her brown skin in a coat of bronze and she grows into the ground. No one can tell the difference as they shuffle around her, give extra space. Look how gentle they are when there is no harm to be done.
Thank you. I love that you read that one because I have this tendency if I'm reading a collection, I'll go through if I see a line that feels like a thesis or like a heart of the book. So this line, what are we allowed to really be when we hurt in public, human or statue? I also love when y'all see the collection, there are these spaces in between. So it's like as we're kind of in the mind of the speaker, these internal calculations of what to do, there's something that the spaces are doing in the form as well that I think is really genius.
Yeah, I think to also speak to that, like the sculpture studies, if you move throughout the book, they start as the narrator is like a third person detached, omniscient point of view, and then as it progresses, the I sort of interrupts, and then by the end of it, the I has reemerged. And I also think about the sculpture study starting as like a sculpture, and the spaces are kind of like the beginning cracks
Mm.
that sort of break over time, and then this real person with agency kind of emerges as well. So yeah, thinking about the poems as literal sculptures that get broken across the book too.
Yeah. I love thinking, yeah, the poems themselves as those kind of chipping away at the ice block, and there's something that human or some truth that gets formed out of the action.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like one of the first things I ever knew about you was the pantoum, like the that poetic form. I think like I would like follow you on Twitter and just know that you were like really great at this particular form,
Thank you.
but just form in general. So why form at all for you as a poet, and what does
Mm.
that allow that you think kind of like free verse might not?
In my first book in particular, I think form helped me to figure out what was important to me. I think oftentimes in the beginning, we come to the page and you can be very overwhelmed with having so much to say and not really knowing how to come at it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times form was the container that allowed me to just kind of come to the page and throw everything into it, and have a space to sort it out. It also kind of helped me to figure out what my poems were asking of me over time. Like I could kind of come to the page and say, okay, I have too much. I need something that's going to help me burrow down to the heart of this, or I have something and I need the space to spiral, so I'm going to reach for something like a sestina. It helped me to be more in dialogue with what I needed and also what the poems required of me.
Mm-hmm.
um, as I moved into this project in particular, um, the space of the museum is very important, and I feel like the book itself is its own kind of museum. You have these prose poems that are kind of like these blocks, these frames, these images that we're witnessing as we move through the book. And I think the traditional forms are also their own sort of art pieces. If we're thinking about traditional form, I think it operates similarly in a way that, these historical educational pieces in an art museum operate.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think it's also important to disrupt. And I feel like this book is an iteration of me like standing in an art museum and misbehaving and,
Yeah.
and sort of yelling back and being disruptive. And one of the things that's really important to me when working in form is populating those traditional forms with contemporary stories, with stories of blackness, with stories of womanhood,
Mm-hmm.
because that's not how they're traditionally, exist. That's not how they are traditionally taught, for example. So it's, I guess, important to disrupt those forms. And I think also in the frame of this book, they are representative of also these historical art pieces that I feel like the book also talks to, and that speakers in the poem talk back to.
Yeah. I love how you talk about it as disrupting the form, especially in this collection, because I feel even more like experimentation and
Mm.
disruption in structure, in the ekphrastic, and then also in like the film and the cinema
Mm-hmm.
kind of scene, what I would call like scene deconstructions. It's like a hyper fixation on
Mm-hmm.
a scene. So we're really seeing it clearly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if you could read one of these like cinematic poems.
Ooh, let's do that. Let's go with I'm trying to tell you something. If you have the book, it's on page 75. I'm trying to tell you something. The opening shot places me in an old boyfriend's kitchen, alien cleanliness of a furniture showroom, a window perfectly placed through which the sunlight accordions across the granite, a dripping dish towel noosed around the faucet spout, the silence so absurd that it mutes the expected plop against the stainless steel. I am an interruption on this set, standing in front of the full sink of dishes before stopping the drain, something robotic in my movements. Then a close up of my face, the running dishwater hazing into a fecal brown in my eye's mirror. Over that sound, a separate human sound from upstairs, too regular for sex, and so maybe snoring, an unfortunate angling of pillow. This is how memory comes to me, like the nasal edge static of 911, what's your emergency? How it grates even when you're the one that made the call. At the sink, a choice has to be made. I can't see through the water. I left the sharp knives in and I want to know them again, better this time around. 911, what's your emergency? I am in need of some other answer than the one I have. There's a bird's eye shot over my head directly into the sink. As the water rises, a few bulbs bob to the surface, streaked with abstract remainders of mush. If there is art to be found here, I am the gallerist. I'm trying to show you something, then sell it. A shadow gathers behind me, the old boyfriend pressing that the dishes must be clean before the guests arrive. I plunge my right hand into the deep. 911, what's your emergency? Familiar warmth, a slow menstrual bleed under the water.
Thank you. This is the exact one I was thinking of. I kept thinking kitchen. And I was like, that's
Yep.
going to sound like not right.
No, I
But
got
there
you.
was a kitchen.
I knew.
Yes, this one. And this takes me to a question about setting because in this collection, we are in art museums, bars, house parties, kitchens, bedrooms, group chats, and place is vital across your work, especially in the first collection where we have Chicago. But how are you thinking of place differently here? And what is the significance of setting when we think of violence?
Hmm. Place was important because I think part of the project of this book is or was to create spaces in which a reader could step into a room or a scene or to be like close up into a scene like you said, and either feel like they're intruding on something that they shouldn't be intruding on or to feel like they're being intruded upon or watched. And so setting has always been important to me because fiction was my first love. I was a fiction writer in undergrad, and I thought that's what I was going to be doing mainly. And I didn't switch over until I took an acrostic poetry class my final year of undergrad. And so, um, place has always been important because I think I've always been concerned with world building in a way that poets don't necessarily have to be, but I was because fiction was kind of like my first thing. Um, so in this book, it was about building these mini sets. Basically, if we're thinking about like the book in these cinematic terms, like we're talking about, a lot of these poems felt like sets that I had to build that someone could step into, that a speaker could perform in. And so it's different in the sense that my first book Chicago was sort of a character, a person and a thing that I felt like I was writing a love letter to. But here I felt like my role was kind of more of a set builder. I was just kind of building all of these mini scenes for which people could step into, and maybe experience a little discomfort along the way, which productive discomfort, but discomfort nonetheless.
Yeah. Okay, I love thinking about your foundation as like a fiction writer. And you're also a photographer. So I'm wondering about the again, then there's photography as a theme and a structure in the book too. How did the photographer version of yourself and the poet version of yourself come together to use that in this collection?
Being a photographer actually forces you to think a lot about um, your own gaze, privacy, how you might be intruding on that. Like we live in an age where there's not many places where you can expect privacy. You could be going about your day and I don't know, be in somebody's TikTok later. And so like taking photographs in public, especially, you become more mindful of like what am I capturing, who am I capturing, who is this who is this intruding upon, like is this violence, um, and also thinking about the uniqueness of how we see the world. There's these series on TikTok actually of photographers who show like this is what you see and then this is what I see. So they'll show like a sort of large frame of a scene and then they'll show like a very specific image they've captured out of that. And so I think the practice of being a photographer helped me to think about privacy, expectations of privacy, how our own gaze can be violent. but also how the uniqueness of our gaze helps to shape our own world and how we all see the same thing differently. And that definitely bled into the book for sure.
Yeah. Um, I'm thinking about a poem. It's named after a camera,
Nikon,
Nikon.
yes, which is also a pen too.
Yes. Okay. Exciting. Could you read that for us?
I can. Let's see, page 17. Nikon Coolpix S210. Once, I wanted a camera, another set of eyes to magnify the small black semicolons marching up the backyard gate, to see the ants the way prey would see them moments before their feast. I wanted to magnify the small black semicolons marching up my legs, that dark prickling of first hair, the way my prey would see them moments before their feast. I wanted to know what it was to be a boy, I mean, to be close enough to really see my legs, that dark prickling of first hair, the way my hair curled into its own hieroglyphics between them. To know what it was to be a boy, I mean, to be close enough to really see, took practice. I modeled. I studied the shots of my hair curled into its own hieroglyphics. Between them, accidental shots of my hand slurred into four. Getting it right took practice. I modeled. I studied. The shots of my body became clearer and less familiar at once. Everything felt accidental. Shots of my hand slurred into four, getting it right in the frame before the flash. I took nude photos. My body became clearer and less familiar at once. Everything felt like a distortion of what I could touch. I swear I changed in the frame. Before the flash, I took nude photos, my brown skin ashing in the light. I realized the pictures were like a distortion of what I could touch. I swear I changed the lens. I still couldn't become myself. Brown skin, ashing. In the light, I realized the pictures were what a boy would make me into with his eyes. The lens. I still couldn't become myself once I wanted a camera, another set of eyes.
Thank you. Yeah, I really love this poem and just the Pantone form, like the subtlety of the repetition in this form. Um, and even the transformation from ants to hair, like
Mhm.
the way things kind of like slowly unfold. Um, this takes me to some questions on humor in the book. So, despite this or working with the fact that there's a deep emotional resonance in this book, we're talking about trauma and violence, I still find there's humor in key moments. um I'm thinking, for example, there's a persona poem, um this ekphrastic poem, A Woman to Woman with Mona, which is funny because the speaker's tone in the poem is very audacious. I think audacity is a form of humor, but then
Mhm.
also this side, you're taking this concept of a woman to woman, which already is really tongue in cheek
Mhm.
and funny. Um, so I'm wondering, how do you see humor as a vehicle to explore or transcend violence or the topics that you're covering in this collection?
Yeah, I think subversive laughter was a thing that I was thinking about a lot in my PhD exams. In the way that Black women in particular, when writing about really painful experiences, would use a type of subversive laughter to create an experience that a very specific audience could embody. So I think it's also a question of like who this book is for and sort of what sort of experience I want certain readers to have. Like that poem in particular, A Woman to Woman, is also a very specific gendered thing. Like it's something that like women know very well, like what a woman to woman means, and we can kind of step into that space
Yeah.
with a sort of familiarity, and that's humorous to us. Whereas there might be readers who are not as familiar, and so they might be kind of locked out of the
Mm-hmm.
humor that's available there. And so this is a book. It says it on the back. This is a book for women. This is a book for Black women. And I think if I'm to have a project that does talk about our trauma and our violation, I think I also owe it to us to create spaces for us to be able to laugh and be able to um, have these particular experiences where we can sort of enjoy and laugh, and maybe others can't. And so I think it's also creating an experience for a particular audience, in which they can experience some enjoyment in a collection that is very much exploring some difficult things as well.
Yeah. I love that, talking kind of about like how humor can invite or disinvite, like
Mm-hmm.
there's a craft to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes when I'm writing humor, I'm always wondering, okay, how do I make sure this is transformative and not like a defense mechanism or a distancing? So,
Mm-hmm.
like, as you're writing these poems that have humor, how do you know you're getting closer to the subject rather than moving further away?
Mm. Yeah, I didn't always know, and I think in the beginning some of the humor was defensive, and I think that's why I had to create distance in a lot of the poems. I think in early versions of some of these poems, um, the humor didn't land as well because the poems were too close to me, and because I think the humor came off as the speaker was wounded, and the speaker was maybe kind of lashing out in a way. And so I think creating distance. So, like the woman to woman poem, for example, it's kind of like a persona that steps in and has this conversation with Mona Lisa. It didn't feel like me, and so then I was able to find this kind of audacious voice that could then like really have this one on one with her, that didn't feel like it was necessarily coming from too personal of a place where I felt like it felt like a version of me. So it was defensive sometimes, but I think that was part of the challenge was striking the balance or finding a way to access it to where it didn't feel like it was kind of lashing out at the reader or lashing out at whoever might be entering the set.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Can you read a any poem that you feel has like the craft of humor in it?
Mm, 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 mm. I mean, you want me to just read Mona?
Yeah, 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 let's hear that. Very exciting.
Let's do that. This poem is also special because I think this was like the first ekphrastic poem that I wrote for this project, which was first like a chapbook project. I was just like, I want to write ekphrastic poems, and then I realized I had a lot more to say.
Yeah.
But I came to this poem because I came across this quote, which is the epigraph. A University of Cincinnati neurologist suggests that Mona Lisa faked the smile in the painting of her made famous by Leonardo da Vinci. And this was apparently groundbreaking enough to appear in the Cincinnati Business Courier in 2019, which I thought was hilarious because I think anybody with sense could look at that painting and know she was not happy to be there. So, a woman to woman with Mona. Being the muse isn't what it's all cracked up to be. Who can tell us to freeze and expect us to do it? Sitting still ain't no woman's work. And Leo fucking bought it, didn't he? Just swiveled his brush where white, yellow, and brown made naked, said sweetheart, tesoro, flatten the brush's hairs on your lips like a thumb or tongue, an extension of the fingers that can no longer distinguish between canvas or shoulder. Thought that smile was his own special thing. But girl, I could call it from a mile away. That's that if you don't hurry the hell up look, that tip of the tongue bastard barely caught. That's that last joke wasn't really that funny, but I'll give you something, something. Trust me, I know it. Ain't nothing mysterious about annoyance. But now that they know, let 'em know. Took 'em 500 years to figure out this was all side eye, girl. Please, I mean, really, what is there to be afraid of?
And then that turn at the end is like haunting and not funny anymore. Like I love that. Um, and and then this line, thought that smile was his own special thing, which takes me to the title, Resting Bitch Face. So how did you come up with that title? Um, what's your relationship to it? And just, yeah, like the kind of reclamation that is a resting bitch face?
Yeah, I've been told I have a resting bitch face quite often. But the title comes from the poem in the book, Resting Bitch Face, of course, which that poem was born because early in the pandemic, when masks were heavily mandated, over time I realized that like men stopped telling me to smile because they couldn't actually see most of my face, which then got me thinking about the ways that even like our facial expressions in public when we're going about our days are something that are policed and are expected to appear a certain way. And so, of course, resting bitch face is kind of like this noun, this description of a way that your face can kind of exist in the world. I think it's also a weapon that is, wielded against women in public spaces. And I think I want I wanted this book to make it a verb. I wanted this book to make it the act of sort of appearing or not caring that you appear sort of pissed off or whatever, like just sort of moving through the world, not concerned about being approachable or being appeasing or appearing a certain way. So I wanted it to be an act by the end of this book, instead of just a thing that's sort of thrown at us. I wanted to be this choice that we kind of make the resting bitch face because we don't care and because we don't care to appear a certain way or don't care to be inviting. I don't want to be inviting, and I think my relationship with it changed as I wrote this book.
Yeah. Can you read Resting Bitch Face for us?
Yes. The epigraph comes from Alexis Pauline Gumb's book Spill and reads, "How did you get here? What trumped up troop of slave ship sloop put you here on my doorstep in your nastiness?" Something about the set of my face says slave, cracks sharp in its stank and slits you uncomfortable. And what do you make of me again? In that gas station parking lot, in the grocery aisle in its fluorescence, when you tell me to smile for you. You too pretty to be frowning makes a fugitive of me, shutters me closed for your business. You even smooth talk yourself into a lie. Say smile and mean relax, mean open, mean peel back, mean lights, camera, action, put on a show for me. Last time I smiled for a man, my teeth sparked white in the dark of his bedroom like police lights in a rearview mirror. What could I afford with that currency besides his violence? Smiling has never bought me tenderness, never tendered me a love that let my face be bitch, and ain't that what you gonna call me anyways? Whether I thaw out for you or not, don't this always end the same? The bright you coax from my mouth, snuffed out as soon as I show it to you.
Thank you. And last question, then we're going to open it up for Q&A. But the collection is organized in sections that I guess denote the painting process. So as we move through the book, we kind of see how a painting comes to be, which kind of reminds me of what you're saying about by the end of the book, Resting Bitch Face becomes this like proclamation. So I'm wondering why this structure and how did you know that this book with all of its forms and all of its topics could be contained in these sections that denote that process?
Yeah, this was actually something that my editor helped me figure out, because sectioning these were very hard. I think sectioning is something that I struggle with maybe, and because I always figure it out in the editorial process, I always need someone's like outward perspective. Um, but I think why we decided to go with painting, I think there's something about the process of painting, especially when thinking about like layering in particular. This book felt very much like that. There were versions of it that existed, and I went back and sort of rewrote a big percentage of it. I feel like there were so many layers. There were the layers of theory. There's a layer of criticism, that I felt like I was just sort of building over time to kind of create the sort of final image. And so I think more than anything, it was about my relationship to what it meant to build a book like this, which was very different than the first book. There were so many different things, so many different contributions, that came into the process of this book. So it did very much feel like I had to lay down one layer, let it dry, come back, and then come back, lay down another layer. It felt very much like a painting process in that way. Um, and and so thinking about it helped us then kind of organize and figure out where things went. And I think also having that structure allowed us to um, build tension. And I think in the final section there is a place where it does kind of explode. Um, and and then you have the final poem, which very much feels like it's the final poem is after Carrie Mae Weems' kitchen table series, if you're familiar with those. There are a lot of pictures in which she kind of centers herself, and she's also like often looking directly at the camera. And I feel like that was the perfect sort of signature to kind of have the speaker centered and looking back at a reader in the similar way. And it felt like that perfect touch of just signing. So it really aligned with what it felt like to build this book.
And I love that that last section is just that one poem. Like that, it's so powerful, and it is a signature. It's quick. It ends the book. I love that. Okay, can you close us out with one poem, any poem that you would like to share?
Let's close out with the signature. In the lens of desire, after Untitled Man and Mirror from Kitchen Table series by Carrie Mae Weems, and after the book Good Dress by Brittany Rogers. I want to be straight backed and brazen. No, I want to know that I deserve it. I want a man as quiet as a rumor hovering over my shoulder. I want a table pebbled with my living and mine only, his drink drained from my cup. I want the ornery praise of a good as gone camel spizzle, bowed in my good glass ashtray. I want the silk kimono and the camisole, the unsanctioned nipple and its silhouette showing. I want to stop wanting, so give me a mirror, a camera, give me my face in the third silver of a man's eye. Give me a finger that fish hooks in the corner of my smirk, that crooks a man to my kitchen when no dinner has been served. Give me a cheekbone sure as a scar, my new brush, my good comb. Give me hair so nice it appears twice, here and there. A photograph in which I am the center. Give me your eye. I've already given you mine.
Thank you. Okay, we're gonna open it up for audience Q&A.
And we've already got like the audience has been so engaged online.
Hey,
Like
y'all.
they have been really excited to be here. We've got a few questions, so I'll start us off with one from online. This one is from Jada, who asks, as a Black poet, have you had to navigate predominantly white workshop spaces? And do you have any advice for Black poets in very white workshops, if this happens to be relevant?
Yes, I think that's been just about all of my workshop spaces. I think I think workshop spaces can be difficult, but I think they're important because you start to figure out what matters to you. And so in workshop, I think it was important for me to pay attention to when I started to get really passionate about feedback or the things that really made me bristle in workshop, because those are the things that I figured out I really cared about. And those were the things that I was willing to fight for. And so in those spaces, of course, I think it's very possible to still find readers who are, good readers of your work. And I think once you find those readers, you can figure out kind of whose feedback to trust, for lack of better words. But I also think that more than who's giving feedback on your work, I think it might be worth your while to pay attention to what you're reacting to and what you feel yourself feeling passionate about in the feedback, because I think that will guide you towards what's important and ultimately what is going to be central to who you are as a writer, regardless of what genre. So yeah, let's focus on the who, and maybe just focus more on the what sticks with you and where you find yourself willing to fight for your work.
Do we have any questions from folks in the audience here?
Hearing this book in its version.
Yes. Oh, gosh. Yeah, so for those online, the question was about kind of what I was reading while I was creating this book. So I can just talk about my PhD list. One of my craft lists was just literally a list of poetry collections from 50 Black women. So from before the Harlem Renaissance, like all the way back to like Frances Harper to contemporary. And then I was reading a lot of work about poetic strategies of resistance in Black women's work. So of course there's theorists. I was reading a lot of bell hooks. I was reading a lot of Audre Lorde, but then I was also reading like psychoanalytic theory about like the mirror stage. Like, there were so many weird things that came into this book. Um, I was reading. There's about Pablo Picasso. There's like part of his granddaughter's, I think, biography that she writes about him and talks about how much of a terrible person he was. And there's part of that I was reading. There were so many strange things that made its way into this book, which was kind of unwieldy in that beginning process. And I think that's also why some of the poems kind of needed to be rewritten. I think the first version of it was fine, but I think I just needed more time to kind of work in a lot of those things that were, I think, working up here, but I hadn't yet figured out how to get onto the page. So yeah, it was all over the place. It was all over the place. Yeah, thank you for that question. I've forgotten how crazy it got in those days. Hi. Mm, it is fun. Mhm. Hmm. That's so funny. Patricia Smith's Skinhead is a really great one. So I'm happy you mentioned Patricia Smith because she's a guiding star for me. Um, the funny thing is, I don't think there is a sort of character that I return to. I don't think there's one that like is recurring. I think the persona poems in this book in particular were all different, um, which was also its own crazy project. But yeah, I don't think there was a character that was like a staple or someone that sort of spoke more than once. I think all of the characters and personas are different in the book. I don't know if that was a conscious decision that I made, but I think my mindset was so different in the writing of each of those poems that I just kind of had to access someone new each time, which I think also made the project a little more fun as well. Yeah, thank you.
We've got another question from Jada Online who asks, besides setting and world building, how have you seen your foundation as a writer inform your very inspiring journey as a poet?
Oh, so one of the things that I think is really fun about being a writer is essentially being nosy and like having to be nosy. And I had to be very nosy to write this book in a lot of ways. I had to think about um what it was like to watch, what it's like to be watched. And I think my nosiness has only increased after this book. There's a poem that's not in this book that I wrote shortly after this book, that was inspired by me being in a cafe and me hearing someone ask whoever they were talking to. They went, "Hey, do you remember the drive-through strip clubs during the pandemic?" Which was wild. And like I there's a whole poem that sort of came out of that. But I think this book was also a practice of using my nosiness for good, maybe, and also just a practice of being a better observer of the world, which is essentially what being nosy is. And I think my photography practice also is a version of that. So I think there were just a lot of ways that I was being encouraged to be nosy for good. And I think it worked out for the most part, I hope. Hey, Natalie.
So you're talking about how there's a lot of fantastic poems. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you decided what works to write about.
Mhm.
If it was like you would seek out artwork that maybe had to do with a particular theme engaging in,
Mm.
or if most of the abstract poems came from artwork that you'd already seen and had already kind of like put a thread to it.
Yes. A lot of them were artworks that I had already seen, or they were from artists that I knew were very popular. Because part of the conversation this book has is, a lot of our famous artists were terrible people in real life. In particular, the men typically, took advantage of women, violated women in their artistic practices, and some of them, had the nerve to document it as well in their art. And you experience the art differently once you kind of know who they were as people. So a lot of them were paintings that I already kind of knew and had in mind, and then there are some that kind of came into the process naturally. There's a poem called "Discomfort at the MoMA" that was one of the poems that was added after the first version, and it was written because I was in the MoMA, and there was this couple who was just like making out in front of the paintings, and we were like, please, for the love of God. And in that particular instance, I literally have included the very literal poem, the very literal art pieces that I was looking at during this time. um and also I was just thinking about the ways that certain individuals, this was a white couple, that certain individuals can just kind of like behave in public without fear of, correction. And how I imagine if racially it was different, then it probably wouldn't have gone on as long as it did. But then that, so those art pieces kind of got included naturally. So a little bit of both, but most of them were some that I had in mind. Hi.
I'm wondering like what you think makes you so like powerful as a writer. Because I think for me, I get like as someone who's also inspired by a lot of black work,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I'm like I'm worried about sounding redundant or
Mm,
talking about the same things because I mean they're still happening, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
what do you think like is there what makes you
Well, one, I want to start by saying there's nothing wrong with talking about the same things. Um, I think we should be in conversation with each other. And I think being in conversation with other artists and writers is necessary for your practice. But because we are often writing about the same things and our shared experience, what's your superpower is your particular lived experience, like your obsessions. Um, this could have very easily been a different book if I wasn't a photographer, if I, didn't have an interest in art, if I wasn't in that art museum watching that couple making out in front of the painting. So I think the ability to start from a personal center and in the writing practice to figure out how close you want to stay to that core, or how far you want to move away. Maybe you want to move all the way into fiction and write a persona poem, and maybe completely kind of detach from that self, and maybe you want to stay pretty close to that self and write a poem in which there is an I that is maybe some version of you. The cool thing about poetry is you get to decide where you land on that spectrum. But at the end of the day, when we are all writing about different iterations of the same things, I think your superpower is always who you are, and how you bring your obsessions into the work and what you have to contribute to a conversation that's already happening.
We've got a question online from Stephen who asks, "How deep into writing the book did you decide to make Resting Bitch Face the central poem? And was the
Mm.
process of working from there smooth, or did you have to slash get to shake up any other ideas you had about the book?"
Mm. I think I always knew Resting Bitch Face was like the hinge. It's kind of like somewhere in the middle of the collection, and I always knew that that's where it belonged. It wasn't the title of the book though at first. It wasn't the title until um until we sold it. So when it was my dissertation, it had a completely different title. It wasn't yet named Resting Bitch Face. So I think that poem was very helpful in thinking about what I wanted the larger project to be. And I think that's part of why I always knew it was a hinge. I also think when thinking about the progression of the book, having it in the middle, I felt like it was a turning point vocally. It was a point in the book where I felt like the speaker and other speakers started to get more audacious and started to take back more of their power. So it was also helpful in organizing the book and figuring out where things go, where they fall on that spectrum of, speakers who maybe don't have not necessarily reclaimed that power and speakers who are in the process of doing so. So having it and seeing it as the hinge was actually very, very helpful in figuring out what the book was supposed to look like in its final stages. But it actually wasn't the title of the book originally. It became the title kind of later in the process. And I'm very happy that we made that choice. That's a great question. I don't even, my dissertation year is like a fever dream. I don't know. I think it was corruption. And then the I was like in parentheses because the I sort of breaks out as I was talking about the sculpture study series. It kind of becomes more prevalent as the book goes on. So I think that was the dissertation title. And then I changed.
Stephen responded, "Oh, such a cool way to hinge it with where the speakers claim their power."
Thanks, Stephen.
Stephen's
locked in.
Stephen's got a lot to say.
Stephen's locked.
You are super engaged. This
Yes.
audience is amazing. Does our in-person audience have any more questions?
Yes. Hi.
I have a question for a lot of people, but what is the Pan doing? Can you talk a little bit more about, like, you mentioned?
Yes, let's talk about her. The pantoum is a form. So the requirements are each of the stanzas have to be quatrains, 4 lines. And what happens is, make sure I get this right. So the second and the fourth lines of one stanza then have to repeat as the first and third lines of the next stanza. And this pattern has to keep happening. There's no length requirement, so a pantoum can be as short as you want or it can be as long as you want. But those are sort of the requirements. So the kind of challenge is you have these lines that have to repeat pretty close within one another. And so then the challenge is, well, how do I make this language kind of fresh when it comes back around? How do I, make it this transition smooth? It doesn't feel stilted. So like that's the challenge, which the challenge that I love. So it's a difficult form in that way. But it's also a lot of fun. I feel like I reach for it when I need to kind of puzzle through something. I feel like a pantoum kind of helps me do that. She's tricky, but she's good. She's great. I mean, when you pull it off, she's like it's like one of the most rewarding things. And I can do a pantoum and I do it successfully. Like you can't tell me anything. Yeah, I've done it.
All right. If no one has any more questions, it's a great way to close off right at the beginning where we started.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much for joining us. Everyone give it up for Taylor and for Resting Bitch Face. And for Courtney as well for joining us tonight. And thank you to our audience for coming out on a Friday night to enjoy some lovely poetry. Thank you to our in-person audience for being amazing and engaged. Again, if you would like to purchase a copy of Resting Bitch Face, Charis selling them up front. And if you would like to purchase one from online, you can do so by clicking that teal link right below our readers. I'm going to ask y'all to stay where you're at because folks are going to come and get their book signed. Yay!